Welcome back. Welcome back to my channel, Conquer the Fear. Let me ask you something. Have you ever built Spring Boot application that suddenly get crashed up and you had no clue why? Or maybe you have got some 500 error and you left your app forever. So you are not the alone. But here is the things, most tutorial what you find on YouTube or any other channels, those won't tell you the details. So exception handling in Spring Boot isn't just about writing try catch block. It's about building the application that are resilient, user friendly, and production proof. So in this video I'm going to walk you through the real world production level exception handling strategies that go beyond the basics. So we are talking about exception handlers, custom error responses, logging, localization, REST API best practices, and how to prepare for an unexpected in both monolith and the microservices. So without wasting time, let's jump into the video. So watch this video till the end so that you have all the insights with respect to the Spring Boot exceptions. Now, very first, what we'll talk about is the exception handling in the Spring. Now, you already know the Spring is one of the best way to handle the exception handling. So it helps developer to catch and return the runtime exception and the application level exception in a very clean and a concise way, which can also be easily maintainable. Now, Spring exception handling, there are different layers. It can be, so these are core exceptions. So the basic exceptions like bean exception, application context exception. We have data access layer exception, that is data access exception, empty result data access exceptions. We have MVC related exception, which are specifically to the MVC, wherever that is HTTP request not supported for any of these methods you have written, where you are trying to call different method instead of whatever you written. Missing servlet request parameter exception. So security exception like access denied, authentication exception. Let's look forward. Now there are types of exception when it comes to, in Java you must be knowing there are checked exception and unchecked exception, right? Similar way, you might checked exception should be either caught at declare at the declaration, that is the compile time. So you have to take care of the IO exception, you have to take care of the SQL exception, so that has to be taken compile at a compile time. But there are unchecked exception, basically like you have some runtime exception and the subclasses, so that will propagate the exception and will throw where this particular application call is been happening. So very specific to the Spring Boot specific exception hierarchy. Now we look into that. Now we have many exceptions like the one is bean exception. Now this is considered as one of the parent of all the bean related exception, because this is related to the bean, whatever you're trying to initialize or have something. Now application context exception, now this is raised when there is some related exception related to the context of the application. Data access, it clearly says when you're trying to do all the data access operations, and there is some exceptions, right? So it is going to be around that. So this is super class of that particular exception. Transaction exception, now when you're dealing with the transaction management, you have some propagation isolation level, and there can be some exception which can be thrown while application is running. So transaction exception throws up. Conversion failed exception, now this is during the issue types which when we are trying to convert some issue, right, some different types. Now HTTP message not supported exception, this is exactly thrown when your media type is not being supported by your application. Now we'll look into the best practices of the handling the exception. The very first way where you handle the exception is using the @controlleradvice, which is one of the global way of handling it. Now what you have to do is that in order to handle the global exception, you have to annotate with the @controlleradvice, which is going to handle all the exception globally for your REST application or whether it is for your MVC application, right? Now the controller level, when you write this, right, you have to have this particular @controlleradvice defined. You need to define a class, and then you have to define a method level exception handler over there. So you have exception handler over there, and which type of exception you are going to handle. So now if you look at the very first thing, you will see that you are handling the resource not found exception over here, and you are going to return that response entity, which is going to be the string which says it is not found. So we have an HTTP status which is going to be written as not found. Similarly, let's say if you are not sure about what kind of exception can be thrown up, you can have the general exception thrown up, so which will handle all type of exception, and basically I would say server side errors, right? So we are going to, when the request land over there and we are not sure about what is happening on that part, you can throw the internal server error over there. Now also you can have your own custom class to be created. So what you have to do, let's say you wanted to create some domain specific errors or application related specific error, you have to just extend your runtime exception class, create your own class, and then you have to in the constructor you can pass on that particular message, and you have to call the super class of that particular thing. So it will take care of the, you can have that one specific message to be defined. Now we have a response entity exception handler, which is specifically for REST API. So you extend this particular REST entity exception handler, and you can customize your HTTP responses basically. Now how to do that is that you have to, as we already mentioned, you have to extend that particular class. You have to override that handle method, override argument not valid exception method, and then you have to pass on this particular details. And then you, if you see, you have to bind that particular results with the that errors, and you have to convert that stream, and then you have to map it with that particular default messages. Ultimately you will get the list of all those particular things, and it will be showed up like there will be a exceptions over there. Now we looked at the basic exception. Now we are going to look at the advanced way where we can handle it, how to techniques to handle this particular thing. So now we already spoke about at the exception handler, which you can handle the specific exceptions. Okay, so you have to define that, and then you have to do that. Second, you can make use of the localization with some message sources. So what you have to do is that you have to define the error messages, and you can localize them using the Spring message source. Okay, so you have get localized method where you can define the code and the local, and then you can return that. Okay, third is the structure of your error response plays a very important role, because it will give you what message, what kind of error code, and what was the timing, right? So this you have to capture that. So what you have to do across your application is to be very consistent across, how do you handle, and how do you respond to the calls. Now there are some common pitfalls we'll be using, we'll discuss about, and how you can also discuss how we can avoid it. So if you look at the first row, right, you are not catching certain kind of exception at the right level, right? So in order to do that, you have to have your layer of exception handling. Like let's say you have the starting point is application, right? So application has got the controller, then it got service, it has got DAO layer, then it has got repository and other things, right? So right location you have to handle those exceptions. Second, you have to what is the exposing the internal exception details. Now never you're trying to expose your internal stack trace, right? Sensitive information like client related details can be exposed in that, so you have to be very careful in that. Now duplicate exception handler. Now when you write your exception handling, you can centrally manage your controller advice over there, so everything will be taken care of there. Ignoring your async exception. Now there are some async exception which are uncaught, right? So you can define as at the async uncaught exception handler over there. Now we have misconfigured exception hierarchy as well. Now there are some custom exception what you define, you have to handle it in appropriately in your Spring or your Java class. Now there are different tools and strategies where you can prepare yourself. Let's say you are doing unit testing exception scenarios, right? So you can test it at the rate test, and then you can define your exception to be handled in a such way where this exception dot class will be there. You can use assert throw in JUnit 5. Okay, so where you can actually throw this, you can have some login mechanism, logging and the monitoring mechanism involved. Like you can use SLF 4J, you can have log back to log your exception. So we can make use of this, we can log those things. Now we can also integrate some observability tools like we have in the Spring Boot, which is already inbuilt. We can add the dependency, that is Spring Boot actuator, which is going to monitor your health. Metrics are provided, there are different endpoints provided over that. Now you have Sentry, Datadog, ELK stack, where you can actually monitor your exceptions, or logging of the information, how your application is performing, what kind of exception are being thrown, so you can get clear idea of that. Now there are some unseen, or I would say unforeseen things which are you have to be very well prepared of. So I will make you understand what are these exceptions. So when it comes with the observability, right, you can introduce your log and the monitoring exception in the real time. So this is how you have to deal with. Now there are some graceful degradation happening. So you have to what you can do is that you can provide a fallback response instead of a total failure of the system. So you can do the response, right, fallback response. Now there are some retry mechanism which we can introduce. So Spring provide you a retry mechanism for certain failure at certain time, right? So there are libraries provided. Now this chaos engineering, basically you are trying to intentionally try to inject some failures to test their resilience, how it is working, right? Now you should have a better user experience. So you should be returning proper error messages, proper exception handling should be done over there. Now with respect to security, you have to have the proper error messages to prevent some information related to the client, or some leaked information that is very critical to the client. Now exception handling in microservices. Now we talked about general microservices, exception handling in the Spring Boot and the Java, right? Now in distributed system, now when you're dealing with microservices, you are dealing with multiple services across different in the cloud environment. Now what you can do, you can use standard formats like RFC 7807 problem details. You can share some common exception across the microservices, so that every microservices which are having similar kind of exception can be taken care. Now you can actually have some circuit breaker design pattern applied. Now earlier it used to be hashtag, now resilience 4j is going to be used up. So you can introduce your fallback or resilience capability inside it. You can handle your exception at the gateway level as well, API gateway. So when your application is requesting something, right, and it lands on the API gateway, there itself there are some security features enabled. There you can routing, client side loading, and other things can be handled at the gateway level. So these things you need to take care. I hope this video is very helpful to you and you got an insight of how in the real world what kind of exceptions are you getting, and how when you're working with the multiple MNC organizations, right? This kind of exception normally comes, and how do you handle this? What are the different strategies we already discussed? I hope that is very clear to you. Please share this video with the needy people. If this video has been helpful to you, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. Thank you for watching.